just looking at the future. I think we've rehearsed a few things where we're collectively and individually trying to get better at what we do, and we've all got opportunity for that, and getting more linked up. But I think there's something to think about around when we say data linkage, what we mean by data. I think that is changing. Yes. So in the context of the work that we do in the UK, the data sets that we have commonly used, hospital separations and family medicine, primary care, that kind of stuff. This is still good stuff. But actually, when you look into hospitals, you see, all the laboratory tests and audit requests and result sets. You see all these technologies, which you can't buy a healthcare technology which hasn't got a USB or Bluetooth connectable thing at the back. They spew data out, whether they're really complicated, huge scale data like an MRI scanner or a PET scanner, or monitoring devices and all this stuff. So technology is producing data at the scale relative to healthcare that's kind of very different from how it was when we both started on this journey. And I suppose what we're doing some thinking about is, well, how do we architect so that we can bring these into a data linkage environment? How can we start to get these data available to researchers with the same precautions and care that we do with more conventional administrative and clinical data? How do we start to have a conversation with the public about, perhaps, if we just take one example as being potentially most worrisome data, like genetic data, for example. How do we bring these into repositories and start, or into data linkage mechanisms, so that the research community can start to use these as assets? Is that thinking going on in Australia as well?
Yes, I think that's the opportunity. So it's the clinical data, which is created all around our country, all around your country, but. And now is increasingly born digital. Not everything is born digital, but more and more. And what we haven't quite got is that sort of joined upstream from that digital data, the patient level clinical data, which might be pathology or imaging. We haven't really been able to bring that into the administrative data. So I think that's an area that's really important. Then, as you said, there's the genomics data, which is fundamentally important because, in a sense, we have the outcomes of the interplay between the genome and the environment. We have the hospitalisations or the cancers and things that have resulted from that. So we've got one bit of the jigsaw, and we need to get these other places together. And I think probably around the world, people are making progress, and possibly with some exceptions, Estonia, and there may be some others, where they really have got joined up data sort of end to end. I wouldn't describe Australia in that way at this point in time. We're certainly, as a country, making endeavours in that direction through a number of different strategies, including something called the My Health Record. But I think that needs to mature, so it's still got a way to go. So I think we do need to keep those things in mind. And of course, the other bit of the jigsaw that we don't have very well is the patient-reported outcomes. So, okay, you fell down the stairs and broke your hip, you've been into hospital, had your hip replaced, you've been discharged 6 days later and you've got a rehabilitation program underway. But in 6 months' time, can you still walk up the stairs, or can you go to the shops and buy a litre of milk? And I think what's exciting is the social media and the opportunities to get additional data into these systems which pick up that gap. So
I think that is exciting, and we as a society, we really don't measure the performance or the contribution of healthcare systems in terms of the difference they make to people. I mean, typically we're interested as a healthcare organisation in activity. How much stuff do we do? And to some extent, how cheaply do we do it? Not what effect does it have? And those are important questions. I think the data should be able to help. But that whole piece about missing that outcome, that patient-reported outcome, is super important. I don't think it's for research organisations like ours to set those up, because actually the primary users of that data should be health systems themselves, isn't it? To understand how well they're contributing to patient benefit. But we should be using that data wherever we possibly can in our studies. The other thing I think that's changing and making this difficult is, so there's I can't remember how many V's there are, but there's a whole bunch of V's that describe big data. And one of those is velocity.
Yes.
And so there is a sort of a challenge for us that do this kind of work in matching up the velocity in which administrative data is constructed, which is slow. Let's be honest. I mean, it takes a long time for a health organisation or a government agency to produce an administrative data set which can then be used for research. Whereas if a patient's wearing a sensor on their watch or whatever it is, it's producing second by second data about them, and the mismatch is enormous. And so there's I think an ongoing question, which I don't think we've answered yet, is how do we create systems or processes like we do in Wales and Australia, which can both simultaneously cope with the sort of timescales of production of administrative data and the more challenging timescales of close to real-time data. In clinical processes will produce data in a sort of daily kind of 24-hour kind of fashion, but these other technologies do it in milliseconds. How do we combine that so that we can produce research utility? And I don't know about you, but I also find there's an appetite and to some extent a frustration with studies that use administrative data in terms of how quickly they can acquire the data they need and do the analysis and turn around the result. And there's a whole reason why that does take quite a long time. But part of it is that the generation of the data of interest takes time, in government or in health systems, and you can't do it faster than that. So there's a kind of push for speedier turnaround, more rapid intelligence, and there's an acknowledgement that some of this data is available super quick in close to real time, if not real time. Have you got any thoughts about that? How we change what we do in order that we start to respond to that immediacy thing?
Yes, well, I think the administrative data, which is the data pulled out of various systems and kept in Australia within a jurisdiction, has had long time frames. Traditionally in the past, they've been really long. And if we're thinking about a hospital discharge summary that might need coding into an international classification of disease, then the patient's got to be discharged, and then you've actually got to look at the record, and then you've got to work out what the code is. I think that's increasingly being automated. So certainly when I started on this journey many years ago, that data would come in very slowly, and then if there was a mistake, it would have to go back and be fixed. And then people would spend an awful lot of time making sure that year's data was absolutely perfect before they would publish it. And that could take 18 months or even longer for some data sets. I think that's definitely changing. So we talked about data being born digital. I think more frequently it's born digital. Coding can be automated and it can be brought into a system much more sort of through an electronic pathway without requiring human intervention, or at least not as much. And certainly in some parts of Australia, they are shortening the time frame for that data getting in, more regular feeds and more quickly available, because I think that goes to the use of it. So as data is being increasingly used, the users are saying, well, I can't wait for the next 6 months, I actually need it soon. So I think the data itself, the underlying capacity of the data is being generated quicker. And I think that's the velocity side of things. It's certainly not up to the velocity of the big data coming out of social media. No. But I think over the next 10 years, that is something that will increase. And I think the timeliness will be improved. And I think that's something we can look forward to.
No, I think that's right. And I agree with you that is. I think the gap between the slowest data and the fastest data is still going to be quite great for a while. And I suppose some of the thinking that we're doing is, well, how can we cope with the difference? Because we can't wait until they're the same. Yes. We'll have to do something about being able to work in that space with slow and quite fast data. There's also the issue about actually fundamentally sometimes different data. I mean, the sort of data we're typically used to using is in columns and rows, and it's got numbers and things inside the columns and rows in the cells. But an image is a whole bunch of pixels and XY coordinates. That's a very different thing to analyze than the stuff that we're doing. So many products and technologies these days produce something which is essentially waveform. How do you use waveform data and co-analyze that with image data and structured administrative type data as well? That the tool set doesn't really exist yet, but lots of research utility if you can kind of have them all in the same space and analyse them simultaneously. Very exciting prospect. Still lots of work to do, I think. And and then of course the genetics data comes back again, as you say, it's so important because it does produce data that makes even at a population scale to understand how people acquire disease and respond to disease and therapy. So important for us to understand. But I don't think I've ever seen a genetic data set. I mean, it's the dullest thing in the world, but it's enormous. And so, again, how do our bioinformatics colleagues have tool sets for that? But they look very different. They do different things from the sort of stuff that epidemiologists and public health people and healthcare researchers typically use. We need to do something in that space too, because otherwise we will miss an opportunity to understand. We were both at a great conference just last week about precision public health and what's that mean and how we're going to leverage this kind of genetic explosion to the benefit of public health. Great question, but no definitive answers yet. I think it's a work in progress, isn't it?
I think what it does say is we need to just continue to expand the storage, because the amount of data, if you think of the next 10 years, we talk about data deluges, and I think this is a data deluge that we need to be able to scale this up. So things like imaging data are big, as you said, genomics is big, and we need to be able to accommodate that.
Yeah.